So run, you cur! Run! Tell all the other curs the law's coming! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear?
Howdy, Theologian.
Howdy.
I love that movie, Tombstone.
It's really good. It is really, really good.
I actually really love Val Kilmer.
Go on.
Well, I think he's
Say
a great
more.
actor.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. And so, but I really love him in this movie. I think I love this movie because of Val Kilmer. That's what I'll have to say.
What other movies do you appreciate Val Kilmer's acting in?
The Saint. Oh my God, I love it. I love it. With Elizabeth Shue. It's so good.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
I actually really love him in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
I don't
So
know if
good.
I've watched Kiss Kiss Bang Bang.
Oh, it's so great. It's like Robert Downey Jr.'s like comeback movie, but Val Kilmer's in it and he's fantastic. Oh, it's so good. You should definitely watch it.
Okay.
Like it's before Iron Man, right? It's like he was like, nobody anymore. Like he was like washed up, like all sorts of mess that he had gotten himself in. He was like not on the scene anymore. And then Kiss Kiss Bang Bang was like his like return back to like Hollywood. In a big way. I mean, I say that like I really know a lot about his story, but I don't. But that movie was just so good.
All right,
Val Kilmer's in it.
I'll put it on my list.
There you go.
Yeah, I feel like I have a long list of movies I haven't seen.
I know. The more that we like find these quotes for our podcast, the more I'm like, ooh, I want to watch that one. There's so many good ones.
Oh, Tombstone, though. Hell's coming.
Hell's coming with me.
Yeah. Also reminds me of the Davy Crockett quote.
Oh, yeah.
You all may go to hell, but I'm going to Texas.
That's right.
Yeah. That's a good coffee mug quote.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. You may all go to hell.
But I'm going to Texas.
Yeah. For some people, those two things are the same.
Oh, what?
I said for some people, not
Ew.
for us.
Who thinks Texas is a awful place?
I don't know. We could probably get into a lot of discourse around some of the situations in Texas that would make it very difficult for certain people to live here and would make them more prone to maybe suffering and injustice. And yeah, I think we could probably discuss that if we needed to, but we don't need to.
Well, I think we have to separate the political policies of the state of Texas from Texas itself.
Okay.
All right. Texas
Maybe.
No.
You have to hold it all together.
No.
I'm just saying, I don't think you can separate things.
Political leadership in the state is not indicative of the state of Texas.
I think that's fair and also could be argued the opposite. But yeah, I mean...
I won't have that argument then.
I love Texas. Hey, I went to school in another state and I hung a giant Texas flag on my
totally.
wall. So I get it.
Okay.
I love Texas.
So in college, there's a group of us from Texas and we took down the American flag one day and ran the Texas flag up.
Oh my God.
And it was there for like, I don't know, entire day before they changed it back. And then the next day they affixed the, where you tie the rope off.
Yeah,
on the flagpole. They moved it like 30 feet up the pole, so we couldn't.
You couldn't get to it anymore.
No, I mean I love the state of Texas. I have a lot of pride, but I do think you're right. Like, yes, we have some very inhumane border policies that are happening right now in the state of Texas, which I think many people, especially those experiencing that, would say that this is hell.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
I
that
think
is
when
a
you
very
look at
real
some of
thing.
the actual lived circumstances of people in a variety of places, certainly at our border, and I would say for many women in Texas, there is a reality
Absolutely.
of fear and actual suffering that occurs.
No doubt.
So border, emergency rooms, like all sorts of places where I would say people experience hell. But I do love that. I want to go back to the phrase, like, you may all go to hell. Because we say that a lot, like, go to hell. Like, what do we mean by that when we say that to people? You can go to hell.
Well, I don't know what someone intends when they say that because I think they are probably saying like die and perish and go to hell.
And like suffer eternally.
Suffer eternally.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
I don't think that they're saying like, I want you to have a really bad experience and be trapped in some suffering here and now. I think they're probably saying it as sort of a curse on the future state of their soul.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
But it probably makes more sense if you're actually saying, hey, go to hell, and you want them to like suffer here and now, right now. Like, go to hell. I hope you have like a really bad day or something, right? Or like, go to hell, like, you know, eat a brick, right? Like, I feel like to be like, you go.
I hope your immortal soul suffers
45 years when you die.
Yeah, exactly.
I hope your mortal soul suffers
for all eternity.
Yeah. So I think it's more like a immediate thing but I don't think we think of hell because of the discourse around hell. I don't think we think of hell as a present day reality. I think we think of it as a future place where, you know, there will be suffering and weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah.
And it will be on fire, and there'll be demons and devils
and pitchforks
and
chains.
A lot of chains in hell, apparently, a lot of bondage, you know, a lot of being thirsty, no water
because it's so hot.
No water, nothing to quench your thirst. That's biblical, right?
Yeah.
You know, the story of Lazarus and the rich man, and
Lazarus and
it's like, please just let me have a little bit of water,
just a tip of the tongue. I do. I think you're right. I think it's funny. We tell people to go to hell, and it's not it's not like we're really meaning their future soul, but yeah, I mean, the discourse is interesting. You know, we're talking about hell because we've talked about salvation, right? And because we've painted this picture throughout several of our podcasts about what kind of the hope we have for God's work in the world is. Mm-hmm. But I think realistically, we have to wrestle with what happens when people choose to reject God, right? What happens when we turn away, because if we believe in free will, then we have to believe that people can choose to not be with God, right? They can choose that which is not God. So what does that actually look like? And how do we understand that? And I mean, that's why we're talking about hell.
Are there consequences for that?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, and I think that brings up a really interesting point around, are we guilty for those choices and are punished for them? Or can we just choose to be away and apart and separate from God? You know what I mean? Or then is it like, so is hell like punishment, or is hell a state that we freely choose?
Yeah. Well, I guess that begs the question, do you believe in hell?
Yeah, I do. I do believe in hell. But I don't believe in hell as punishment, because that doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
I believe in hell as a choice that we can make.
So before
to separate ourselves from God.
I want to know more about this.
Yeah.
But we probably should start about the complexity of hell.
Yeah. Let's talk about it.
As sort of seen in Scripture, right? Because we have, I mean, if you're listening to this, just imagine what hell looks like, and you probably have a very Dante's Inferno kind of picture in your head, which is, you know, been sold to us and told to us throughout the centuries as a physical place, most notably, probably most often below the earth's crust, right? In the depths of hell, there is a place where we are punished for not believing in Jesus Christ. And that punishment is eternal, and that punishment is suffering. And for the rest of time, when we die, if we fail to obtain salvation, we will be stuck there. That is that definition of hell does not exist in Scripture. It's not biblical. It is a mashup of a lot of different things. Hades, the Greek understanding of a place in the afterlife.
Yeah, the underworld.
The underworld,
yeah.
right? Where
which came from the name of the Greek god, Hades.
Hades,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's the Greek sort of philosophy and mythology that has been introduced into this equation. There's a Jewish understanding of hell,
Sheol,
right? Which is sort of an absence, a gloomy, foggy, dark place.
But it's also just like Hades, where all souls go.
All souls go,
Yeah.
right? So Hades, everyone goes there. Sheol, everyone goes there. And then God is sort of sorting it out, which is that sort of happens later, right? That interpretation of Sheol. And then there is Gehenna, which is the understanding of hell in the New Testament, but only 12 times is it really referenced.
Yeah.
And it's sort of
Jesus.
Jesus
references
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is actually a physical place.
Yeah, this is so interesting.
Right? It is not a
it's not like a spiritual future realm.
no, it is a physical place. Right, Gehenna really means the valley of Hinnom, which was the site of actually child sacrifices by the Ammonites to their god Moloch, and then to sort of make sure that doesn't happen anymore, they turned it into a trash dump.
It's like a dump.
They're garbage,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so when Jesus is referencing hell in Scripture, Jesus is referencing that place, that location as a metaphor for life, right?
Right. And the fiery, like even the images of like kind of fires and burning and like suffering
comes from the sacrifice of children.
Yeah. And also the way that like trash and refuse would, combust and like all sorts of things that would happen.
And then when it was on fire, it just constantly was burning.
Yeah.
right?
Smoking constantly and like
really
gross and
it
disgusting. Yeah, exactly. So I do think that's important to recognize that so much of our scriptural references to quote unquote hell are actual, like has to do with an actual tangible place.
So you said you believe in hell, but not as a form of punishment. Say more about that then.
Well, the idea that there would be some sort of divine eternal punishment does not reconcile with who I believe God is, that I see evidence of throughout Scripture and in my own life. So it just doesn't make sense that God would divinely, eternally punish us for our sin when we're also told that Jesus' presence certainly represents forgiveness and grace and salvation while we were yet sinners.
Yeah,
so
Jesus.
I just don't understand.
To save us while we were sinners.
Right. So I don't understand how it's like Jesus saves, but it didn't work somehow, and so like you're punished for your salvation or like for being sinful, even though you're also forgiven for your sin. Like I don't understand how.
But only if you ask for it, right?
Right, which then doesn't, because we have so many folks who believe that if you don't believe in Jesus, then you are not saved from your sin. But then they would, in the same breath, turn around and say, but this is all by God's grace and all by faith. And there's nothing you can do to work for your salvation, because God forbid, that you participate in your salvation, even though there is scriptural evidence for that, just putting that out there. But they would turn around and say, okay, so it's not by anything you do,
right?
And except somehow it is actually by something you do. So I don't understand that.
This is
it just doesn't make logical sense to me.
Yeah, if you believe in free will, it doesn't make logical sense, because if you believe in free will, then you have some sort of agency in this equation, right? The ability to make a choice is exercising that free will. Now, as Wesleyans, we believe that God's grace is at work in our lives so that we can make that choice. We can't make that choice without God's grace,
right? But
we do have some responsibility, right? to say yes to God. If we can't say yes to God on our own, then we have no real ability to exercise free will. I'm right there with you. What I think's interesting is that that's really the way predestination and sort of God's ultimately in control and we don't have free will plays out, right? That you can have these two things, right? No, not everyone can be saved, only those who believe in Jesus, but even your belief in Jesus was already predestined. You didn't actually do anything. But if we reject that, then we are left with this, I think, very clear problem that how can God punish us while doing everything possible to save us? It just doesn't make sense. And why is our death the end of that redemptive work? Why would God give us an infinite punishment for a finite amount of time? You know, like
why would God give us infinite punishment for behavior that we committed during a finite amount of time? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, like we're alive only for
on the upside.
On the upside of
100 years.
Yeah. Why would we then be sent to hell for all of eternity? Why is it
for
only
100 years? Yeah.
Yeah, that seems.
Yeah, we're like half of it. We don't even know what we're doing. Yeah.
In what world is that just?
Yeah, no, it's not.
So I think that you're right. Like, it's hard to see hell then as a sufficient punishment for fallible, sinful, broken people or incomplete people.
Yeah.
Right? In a world, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I agree.
That makes sense.
So do you believe in hell? I mean, yeah, I believe in hell. I think there have been moments where I felt like I was in hell already in my life, you know, where the suffering and the pain and even for a hot second, like the hopelessness of whatever I was going through. Right. Yeah. I mean, where it just felt like this is the absolute worst and I don't see a way out. I mean, like, I think about situations that, you know, it feels like by the grace of God, I have not experienced personally, but I know other people who have. And we see news stories of people like experiencing absolute horrors. I mean, just, you can't even fathom like the pain and the destruction and abuse and, you know, the environment of war and violence. I mean, I just can't, like, when I think about it, it's obviously very upsetting. So yeah, that's hell. Like, that's hell because there's no way that God is, it feels like, let me say that there's no way that God could be present in those places. And to me, that's what hell is. Hell is being apart from the work of God. You know, hell is like, I can't see light. I mean, hell is, there's no hope. Hell is, God is not here. Right. And I just think well, maybe not we all, I hope maybe not all of us, but there have been moments certainly where you felt that, where I felt that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that's a feeling.
Yeah.
God's absence,
yes.
but not a reality.
Yes,
right?
100%.
Because we believe that God took on that which we would describe as hell.
Yeah.
In the form of Christ on the cross, the events leading up to his crucifixion, being exposed, being, you know, tried and found guilty in a unjust court, being stripped and whipped and beaten and mocked and ultimately crucified.
And like crucified,
painful death.
I mean, suffering,
right? So when we think that God is absent from this place, you know, God, we must be reminded, I think, and this is our responsibility as Christians to remind one another that God is still in that there is no place that God is not, including hell.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's really powerful. And that to me is why, you know, even in thinking of some of the atonement theories that we talked about, like, I don't want to throw out the the emphasis on Christ's death and suffering, because there is such power and connection there. And hope, because we're reminded that even in our worst moments, like, God is still there. And I think I want to really distinguish, though, that environments that feel like hell, or that are hellish, or that maybe we would say, yeah, hell exists because this exists, right? War exists, that's hell.
Yeah.
They're not of God, though.
No,
those
they're not
environments
God.
are a result of what we would say sin. Going again back to our conversation about what sin was. So
And I would be really careful to say it's not just any sin. It is sort of an accumulation of sin,
Yeah.
or a product of true evil. Like, if we
Sure.
want to talk about evil and its connection to hell, I would say that, like, hell exists on earth because evil exists on earth, right? I don't
Right.
think we get to hell, like places of hell here on earth in real time, just because because there's been an accumulation of our own sin.
right.
Maybe that's the case, but certainly not in a broader context, like socially, like war, right? Like, sin didn't put those children in a war zone into that environment, right?
Right.
It was a collective sort of movement of evil that allows these places to exist. And I think it's important to say that, and a way to reaffirm hell is not a punishment
Right.
from God,
Right.
but a reality in which we create, or the world creates, when God's grace is, and forgiveness and goodness is sort of
Rejected. Yeah. Over and over and over again.
Right.
Yeah. And I that's what I mean, though. Like, hell is not of God, but God is with us even in hell.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, is really, that's the reminder there.
I think it's good. I think it's a really good reminder. And God is working, I think, to redeem us from that hell.
Yeah.
Right? This is where my view of hell is sort of, if hell exists in the classic terms, it's not, for me, I don't think it's a actual
Fiery pit.
I think it would be sort of just the cease to exist, right? Because I don't think you can exist somewhere that God is not. I also think that, yeah, maybe it exists as an idea, or a possibility, but never realized by individuals, because I think that God is constantly at work trying to redeem the world. And I don't think that redeeming work stops with God upon our death. And so I don't think God coerces us into relationship, but I do think God is persistent in wanting a relationship with us and all of creation. And I don't think because I think God's so good at that and so persistent in that I can't envision a scenario where we would ultimately say no to God. Because that would make us more powerful than God. But I do think it has to be a choice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I don't think God
too. I do too.
forces us to say yes.
Right.
But I do think God's good at getting us to say yes.
Which is like that old adage, right? That you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Yeah. Totally.
So, like, why would God punish us to get us to love God and choose God?
More? Yeah.
Yeah. But if God is, just the sweetest honey, right? Like, irresistible, almost irresistible.
Almost. Yeah.
Not fully, but
Not
almost.
fully.
Yeah. Then how could we not want to choose that? Like, how can that not appeal finally and wear us down? That, to me, though, this is really interesting, because the notion that we still have this opportunity to choose God after our earthly life has concluded, I mean, that raises questions around the doctrine of purgatory for me. Yeah. Let's talk about purgatory, because if hell is kind of this state or place, honestly, however you want to think of hell in terms of afterlife, right? In terms of after we die.
Yeah, if we're bracketing hell,
if we're bracketing hell, kind of
saying it's a reality
Exactly.
post death, not
Right.
a reality here and now.
And we're saying, though, that there's still a chance post-death for you to choose heaven, essentially, then purgatory kind of starts to make a little bit more sense. Now, the doctrine of purgatory is interesting because essentially it's like this waiting room where, or almost like I think of it as like like a divine car wash where it's like you like drive up in your car, is like you're ready to go to heaven, but they're like, you got some dirt on you, so we're gonna send you through this car wash, and it's gonna feel weird, and it's gonna be kind of loud, and it's gonna be kind of scary, but you're gonna go through this car wash, but then you'll be purified on the other side of it, and now you can come to heaven. So like purgatory is this concept that
Spiritual
souls,
car wash.
yeah, it's like a spiritual divine car wash where souls, and before they can get to heaven, they have to be purified. I mean, you can't be in the God's presence without being like sacred and holy. Again, kind of being clean and ready essentially for God's glory, to be like in the divine presence of love and goodness and power and grace and mercy and all those things. So it's like you got to cleanse yourself of all the mess that we acquire, the selfishness, the ugliness, the evil, the meanness, right? So it's like purgatory is that process of a soul kind of getting cleansed and purified.
I can't get the car wash out of my head. I worked at a car wash. Right?
Oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
did?
And
I always wonder about people who work
before
at
I
the
went to
car
college.
washes.
I worked at a car wash. It was a hellish job, actually. You think
Okay.
it's kind of easy, but it's, I mean,
I don't know it.
no.
I'm always very appreciative of the
you know,
folks
when
who
you're
help me clean my
doing, 40 cars in 2 hours, there's nowhere for them to go. Like once it enters a tunnel, you have to like get it out and get it wiped down. So like, yeah, you got to be pretty efficient with your getting your cars through and then back to the driver. Which, purgatory seems to be a very efficient way to do things. The issue with purgatory from like Protestants is really, I don't think it's as theological as we think it is. It had more to do about the function of the church, right? Like,
well, yeah, I was
going to
say
selling of like indulgences,
right,
and,
exactly,
like, prayers for those who have died.
So it became a doctrine, and it still is a doctrine in the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and so that's what they took this concept that was theological, and they like took it and they made it about like, well, then if my loved one is in purgatory, I'm going to pray and maybe do some things to kind of quicken them through purgatory so that they can get to heaven more quickly. Yeah. And so they don't have to stay in purgatory for too long. So then it was like the church sold indulgences, which, was like favors from God essentially. And you could pray and you could like, have prayers for the dead, and, you could like get into all of this to like essentially move your loved ones through the car wash a little faster.
Yeah, it was a way for the church to make a little money.
Yeah, it was an express car wash. So, and that's what the reformers, right? That's what they really pushed back against, was this notion of like selling indulgences.
Totally.
Because again, they thought, well, that makes it about works righteousness, right? Which is about like what you do to earn somebody or to pay,
Christ did that work for us.
Well, and that's what I just keep coming back to, like, but God is working for us. Like, we believe that God is at work in the world. So I don't know. I mean, theologically, I'm just saying it kind of makes sense to me theologically, even if I agree I would not want to get into like this whole a whole like scene of trying to like quicken a soul through that purification process. I don't think that's up to anyone else but that person.
Yeah, I mean, and there's definitely Wesley believed that, when we die, we're sort of in a state of waiting until the final, Christ's return and everything's made right. Then there's sort of the separating of the goats and the sheep during that time, right? So this idea of being held once we die, our souls being held in some space, has tradition within the church.
Yeah. And some of the ancient writings, the earliest writings.
Yeah. But I think that it has been, there's not a clear path that you can draw from from the beginning of the Christian church to where we are today, there's not just been one idea or doctrine around hell as a physical place. And I think the more we look at hell as the place where we go when we die, if we're bad or don't accept Christ or too sinful or whatever, really messes with our work to alleviate with God the places of hell that exist here and now. And in many ways, we can, much like the conversation we had last week about eschatology and how we look at the end times, how we come to understand that and believe in that affects how we live here and now. I would argue that a concept of hell, a theological concept of hell, impacts how we live here and now as well. And there are folks right now who think the most important thing to do is make sure that someone doesn't end up in hell. And there are a lot of resources poured into the evangelism of the world based off of a notion that this is the only chance this individual is going to get, right? When we could reposition those resources, that energy, that theological thought into eliminating places of hell here and now. And so when we become so obsessed with punishment that is awaiting us if we don't accept Christ, we fail to actually do the real work of participating in God's salvation here and now. Because ultimately, I think God's going to save us. Can we speed up the car wash in today? Can we get people through that hellish experience right now and get them to another side? Can we participate in God's work right now so that folks can have wholeness and hope and experience grace and forgiveness and all that good stuff?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because in talking about hellish situations, a lot of times those are experienced by people whose own behavior has not contributed to those experiences, right?
Absolutely.
But have you ever had a moment where you're like, you have confronted your own sin, right? Your own choice to do something, and how, like, I don't know, how that is can be such a gut punch when you realize, like, oh, I really messed up. And and this is hard. And like, I have actually created, this is like a hell of my own choosing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And to me, that's where this is not about like hell that exists outside of us. This is about that hell that exists within us.
Where shame is dominating us,
right?
And we feel, when we are aware that the way we're feeling is our own doing, it sort of creates this like really vicious cycle where all of a sudden we can't get out of it and we recognize it's our fault.
Yeah. And
I think like, that's a spiritual hell that we can live in for sure. Internally.
And that's what I think we, like, the recognition that we are still loved and forgiven.
Absolutely.
And like, quote unquote, cleansed. I mean, that notion of like, when I need to go through a car wash, and like, that is, sometimes I don't want to, I mean, I'll be honest, like sometimes I don't want to be nice. I want to be mean.
Yeah. I don't want,
I
don't want repentance and forgiveness to actually
I want to get my way.
Me.
I want what I want, and I don't want to be like, and so that kind of, those moments of recognition of like, not only am I shamed, but I also just want to be selfish for a little bit, right? Like those ideas though, when they're carried out, it can be really hard then to to let go of some of that of ourselves, like to be willing to choose. I mean, I always think like, why would someone not choose God? Well, because sometimes it feels like God is asking me to do something that I just, dang it, I don't want to do it.
Yeah, totally.
I want to go easy. I want to be selfish. I want to be like focused on me. And so I don't know. I think when any conversation around hell, we have to be honest about the fact that there is something kind of appealing in a very limited way and a very personal way sometimes about choosing hell, because we're so stubborn sometimes. I mean, we'd rather suffer with our own, to get our own way, to admit we're wrong, to do the hard work of change and cleaning.
And guess what, though? And the good news is, whether it's created by others and we experience it, or it's created by ourselves and we experience it. There's nowhere that we can go that God isn't there, and
Just
that's
ready.
the good news of the gospel.
Yeah.
And God's working. God has done incredible work through the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ to save us from that.
Yeah.
And God isn't done, right? So
God isn't done though. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's the most important thing to take out of
God's going to last
conversation.
way longer than our own stubbornness.
Do I believe in hell? It really doesn't matter. I would say what matters is that I don't believe that God is done, and that salvation and grace are far more powerful than I can even conceive.
Yeah.
And that's where
Love
I like
it.
to leave it. Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, we fixed that.
Fix that one. See if we can fix something next week.
Okay.
I'm Reverend Mitchell Boone.
And I'm Reverend Elizabeth Moseley. And thanks for listening to Howdy, Theologian, a podcast for all who want to better understand the words we use and how they fit into a progressive theological context in today's world.
We're pastors at First United Methodist Church of Dallas, and you can find us worshiping in person or online on Sunday mornings. Follow our church on socials for more awesome content, and make sure to subscribe and share with your friends.